Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
All right, welcome to Getting to Know You. My name is Joe Nash. Today we're going to be speaking with two people from the Knickerbocker Mansion out in Schaghticoke. We have with us Stephen O'Connor. He's a volunteer, and Stana Iseman. She's the restoration project coordinator. Is that what is correct? So welcome. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Now, I guess I would like to start here. When I think of the word Knickerbocker and Washington Irving and all that, I think of the Hudson Valley and in Albany sometimes. So, I mean, this place is in Schaghticoke. So why don't we start there? What are the Knickerbockers doing in Schaghticoke when we think of them as more Hudson Valley and Albany, I guess? You want to...
Well, the whole name is Dutch, but the Knickerbockers actually came from Holland. But the guy who came from Holland came with the name Van Wee in 1674. Came to this country and changed it to Knickerbocker. And he settled. The family settled in Schaghticoke in 1709. One of the sons of the original fella, and then the Knickerbockers were there until 1946. The Knickerbocker Mansion was built in the 1780s, and it was built by Johannes and Elizabeth Knickerbocker. And one of their sons was named Herman. And Herman was a friend of Washington Irving.
Okay, so there's the connection, Washington Irving.
Herman was a character. Herman was elected as a Federalist congressman in 1809, and he was a friend of Washington Irving's. And when Washington Irving lost his fiancée and Washington Irving was mourning her, he went to Schaghticoke to mourn, and legend has it that while he was in Schaghticoke, he wrote the Father Knickerbocker Tales. Also, his first and his most famous work was Dietrich Knickerbocker's History of New York, where he used the pen name Knickerbocker.
All right, and those are the stories with Rip Van Winkle and...
Rip Van Winkle and Legend of Sleepy Hollow.
The two famous ones.
Yes.
So the connection is the Knickerbockers were from Schaghticoke, and they were friends of Washington Irving. All right. Well, I always think of like...
Well, the name became very famous because of Washington Irving having written the books. And people started using the name Knickerbocker for New Yorker. And then they started using Knickerbocker for their place or their product, whether or not they were related to the Knickerbocker family. And so that's what really made the name famous, because it became synonymous with New Yorker.
Okay. Well, it's still in the area, too.
Well, really, it went from a family name to a symbol and then to a brand. And what happened was the Knickerbocker name, and Knickerbocker means marble baker in Dutch, and it may have that may have been one of Herman's occupations when he came over. We know he came over as a sailor in 1673. That was the year that the Dutch had recaptured New York from the English, and then he stayed, and he changed his name to Knickerbocker. So he may have worked baking marbles, which were very popular back then. They were a very popular game, and they were baked out of clay. So that may have been why he took the name.
Well, one of the spellings was Knicker. B-A-K.
Actually, he started out Knickerbocker.
Okay.
And actually, it was Washington Irving who changed it to Knickerbocker, because when he wrote the Knickerbocker History of New York in 1809, he changed it from Knickerbocker, which is what the whole family had been up to that point, to Knickerbocker with an O. He did a lot of things like that, twisted things. He used the pen name Dietrich Knickerbocker, using Herman Knickerbocker's nephew, Derek Knickerbocker, as...
So just sort of as
just a little twist on a lot of things, yeah.
Well, that's good. Well, so tell us about the house. This is out in Schaghticoke, New York, on what road is it on?
It's 132 Knickerbocker Road.
Knickerbocker Road, okay. If you go to the website, it's nickmansion.com. And then there'll be directions and everything. Yeah. So tell us about the house. And I know it hasn't been really open to the public that long compared to a lot of other historical places.
Right.
Why don't you give us a little history
Well,
of
the
that?
house was built in the 1780s, like I said, by Johannes and Elizabeth Knickerbocker. And when they built it, they built an architecturally significant building because it's built like homes were built in the Netherlands during the Middle Ages. So Johannes Knickerbocker called on his forefathers' way of construction in order to be able to build the building. There are only a few homes like this, a few buildings like this in the United States. They're all in the Hudson River Valley area of New York. Knickerbocker Mansion is the largest of these buildings, and it's also the one that's furthest north on the Hudson River, where the mansion's only about 1 mile from the Hudson River between Mechanicville and Schaghticoke, just off Route 67.
Okay.
So architecturally, it's a very historic building. Knickerbocker family lived there until and owned it until 1946. The last one Knickerbocker owned it died, and the house was purchased by a farmer family named Weirs. Now, just because the Knickerbocker family didn't continue there are other Knickerbockers around. It just happened that family didn't have any heirs. That part of the family.
Well, I should say you're both descendants of the Knickerbockers.
Right.
That's
Without the name Knickerbocker
Well,
attached
that's
to
what I
us
mean.
right now. We lost that several generations ago. But yes, we are both.
Yeah, it seemed locally the family. There's an old expression called "the family ran to girls." In other words, they had a lot of daughters. So not too many of us today have the Knickerbocker name in the area that are descendants.
Around the country, though, there are
people with less.
there are people with the name Knickerbocker or Knickerbacker. They're all related because there was when Herman Jansen came over in the 1670s, there was no one named Knickerbacker or Knickerbocker in the Netherlands. He made up that name for whatever reason, so anyone in the world with the name Knickerbocker is related to this family.
Okay.
But our branch up here that we descend from was short on males, so we lost the name Knickerbocker early on. Weir family, when they purchased the place in 1946, lived there until the 1950s. What they didn't like about the house with it is that it's very original. Very few changes were made from the time it was built in the 1780s. And so there's no heating system, no plumbing, very little electric. In fact, the whole east side of the house had never, ever been modernized in any way. So they needed a house that was more livable for the 1950s, and they decided to move out. And when they moved out, they sold the mansion and the 2.5 acres around it to a group that had newly formed called the Knickerbocker Historical Society. And the Knickerbocker Historical Society worked on preserving the mansion and having some tours. But they needed some money for some major restoration, and I've got to tell you, fundraising from the cornfields of Schaghticoke is an incredible challenge. It's a rural area, and trying to raise funding for any kind of restoration project is extremely difficult. And the house started to fall apart before they were able to do what they needed to do. So the house was closed in the mid-1970s and did not reopen until things really got going in the late 1980s, and we opened in 1993 again with tours.
All right, so you've only been open since 90s.
Which interesting enough, were hard hat tours because there were still sections of the ceiling coming down.
Yeah, well, we were minus 2 walls. If you look on the website, you'll see the early picture of the mansion in 1988. Half of the front wall had fallen in, half of the back wall had fallen in. And the foundations under that were crumbling, and so that was where you had to start with the restoration. So the first restoration project was in 1991, and that was rebuilding the front foundation and front wall and stabilizing the building. 1993, when we had our first hard hat tours of the mansion, the entire back wall was in the process of being reconstructed, and there was no back wall.
So I take it a hard hat tour is you.
You literally need a hard hat, a construction hard hat. And as the years went by, we had phased our restoration, which is why we've been able to be successful. In fact, New York State Department of Historic Preservation uses the Knickerbocker Mansion as a good example of how a rural organization can be successful with a restoration project. Because rather than looking at the whole project and saying, we need $1 million to make this happen, our architect, who's Robert Pierpont, he's a historic preservation specialist in architecture, had phased the approach so that he prioritized each phase. So we started with the most important and worked our way down through the list. So that's why we started with a front wall and a back wall, stabilized the inside of the building. Then we did a roof. In the early 2000s, we did windows and shutters because prior to that, again, if you look on the website, you'll see our windows.
Well, I
were
should tell people
plywood.
on the website, there's a lot of pictures.
Yeah.
Not only of how it looks now, but of
as the
like,
progress has been made in
going on
the,
like
in the
88,
various.
93, 90. So there's
Yeah.
interest, and there's some indoor pictures too of that.
Yeah, well, we finally, about 3 years ago, came inside, having done most of the exterior restoration, and now we have the whole east side of the mansion restored.
And the building does it have that status as historical?
It's
site
on the
or
National
whatever?
Register.
Oh, okay. So
Yes,
that's-
it's been on the National Register since the late 1960s.
Well, the whole site's really on the National Register because
There's a cemetery there too?
a cemetery is there, but what's very interesting is the Wittenagamet oak is there, and the remains of the Wittenagamet oak. The Wittenagamet oak was planted in 1676 by Governor Andros of New York State, well, New York Colony back then, to commemorate a peace treaty between the local Indians and the settlers that had been signed right there at that site on the property. What people don't realize is that Schaghticoke was part of Albany back then. And
Even though it was on the other side of the river?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and
Yeah. It was actually part of the city of Albany.
All right.
And part of the treaty was Governor Andros.
That's pretty far from Albany.
Yeah, well, still part of the city of Albany. And the reason for it was important to the folks in the city of Albany because of the concern of the French and their Indian allies in Canada, because actually those folks wanted New York State. And they were continually coming down into New York State and trying to take over.
Okay.
And so Governor Andros, part of the treaty was he wanted protection for the city of Albany. And when he negotiated the treaty with the Indians, this is a peace treaty among the various Indian tribes because he wanted the local Indian tribes to all be friends and not be fighting because he had to worry about the fighting that was happening from the north. And he also wanted them not to be fighting the local settlers.
Okay.
So that was part of the treaty was that there would be peace between all parties locally and that the Mohawk Indians would provide the defense of the northern area of the city of Albany.
Which was
like Schaghticoke, Mechanicville, that area
Okay.
across there.
And you're
it
saying
looks
the
very bucolic now when you go through Schaghticoke, but there were Indian massacres right in that area. The most famous one is the Kittle family,
The Kittle family,
which
yeah.
there was a woman who lived locally named Eliza Bleecker who became one of the early Gothic writers in American history because she wrote one of the first capture novels, which was the capture novel is the plot where usually a white woman being captured by the Indians and forced into slavery. And she's nationally known, Eliza Bleecker. She made contributions to American literature right from Schaghticoke.
But you were saying before there's a tree that's been there since
Well,
since the 1600s.
the remnants of it are there now.
Now,
It was planted in 1676 to commemorate this peace conference. And as a matter of fact, the peace conference also it gave the name to the area that we're in Schaghticoke, which is the Vale of Peace. The mansion is located within the Vale of Peace. And it lasted from 1676 until...
1949.
So at the house, is there all kinds of things explaining all this history?
Yes.
You can read? So Steve, how did you get involved, if you're a descendant, and did you get involved before the 90s or after?
No, I've only been involved about 5 years ago. I had the fortune of having a cousin who retired to Salt Lake City and did the family genealogy, and I had kind of known that we were descended from the Knickerbockers, but she actually verified it.
You didn't even, weren't 100% sure?
We're not 100% sure. It was
okay.
legend that we were descended from the Knickerbockers, but she verified it, and I started to have more free time. I'm retired now, so I started to volunteer at the mansion.
Well, when you read on the web page, you have this long thing here about notable Knickerbockers, and I have to say there's quite a colorful history of some of these characters. I guess the history, I don't know, was like that back then. I mean, people, there's crazy stories. They're changing their name. They got married 5 times.
The most interesting one was probably Herman Knickerbocker, the fellow who was friendly with Washington Irving. He married 3 times. They were all heiresses, and his first wife, he was married to. Her name was Rachel I'm sorry, her name was Arietta Lansing from Albany, and she was an heiress, and she gave him 5 children and died. And I believe she died in, was it March? And by June, he had remarried a second, an older spinster, you know, who I believe he took pity on, who a 26-year-old spinster, who was also an heiress, who gave him 5 children, and she became so ill after the birth of the 5th child, she couldn't get out of bed. So he had his needs, so he brought his mistress into the house, who lived in the house while his wife was dying in the other part of the house. And he was, as I said, a character. That wife died, and he had to wait a few years to find another wife, and he did. Most of the
Not the woman that was...
No,
Oh, okay.
no. She died shortly thereafter,
shortly thereafter, too.
He found another heiress and had 4 children by her.
I know, it said here he had 4 or 5 children with each.
Yeah, he had
Right.
14 by
Well,
the time he died.
Well, no wonder there's so many descendants.
But
of,
wife number 2, actually, she had the last laugh because she left a message for him on her tombstone, and we won't tell you what it is here. You'll have to come to
It's
the
up
mansion.
there, all right.
But it's there
Yeah.
to be seen on the tombstone. Yes,
Well, then why
so-
don't we talk about that? What are some of the I shouldn't say events, what are some of the things people can do when if they go out there, if they're on a Sunday ride? Because you're mainly open on Sundays from 11 to 3 for tours, and you can just show up. I mean, you
Right.
kind of make a point, but tell us about if you just were to show up on a Sunday, what are some of the things you could
Well, on
do or
a
see
Sunday,
or-
we basically give tours
tour, okay.
to people and take them around the mansion, go out to the tree or the remains of the tree.
the tree from the 1600s?
The Whitnagua oak
Okay.
peace tree remains are still there. And go down the Knickerbocker Cemetery. There, in the mansion, there's an exhibit. There's a notable Nick room, which
Okay.
where you can talk about and see pictures of these famous Knickerbockers that we've talked about. We talk about the restoration. As some people only want to talk about restoration, other people want to talk about the military aspect of the Knickerbockers because there were from 1709 when Knickerbockers started living there until the Revolution. There was a lot of fighting going on, and so most of the Knickerbocker men
We're in the colonial wars and the revolution.
we're in the militia. Well, we're in the militia and all part of that. So it depends basically on the focus the people want when they come in. We can just show them the mansion and the way it's been
So
restored.
people are just interested in
History.
older history.
Yeah, or some architecture students come because the architecture of the mansion is so special. Students from RPI sometimes and other architectural
Okay.
schools will come up for that. We make a lot of tours by appointment, usually for groups, and we'll take a group through, and depending on the theme that they want, we will focus on that. We do authentic colonial Dutch lunches and dinners, and again, that's by appointment. With certain groups.
Okay.
And,
Now, is there a fee for a tour? We could tell?
we don't charge a fee for the tour, but we gladly accept donations.
And what about for these authentic colonial Dutch meals? Is there a...
Yes, yeah, there is. It's $20 for an authentic colonial
Okay.
Dutch lunch and $30 for a dinner.
Okay, now what
We
would
usually
be,
do a program along with
Yeah.
those,
Yeah.
too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, now, what would be in a authentic colonial Dutch lunch or dinner?
We have to remember their menu was a little more basic than ours,
Yeah.
and you could only use the ingredients you had available. We usually for a lunch do a chicken orange dish, and some kind of a salad. Cabbage, coleslaw type salads were very popular with the Dutch, and that's usually a variety of different types of bread, penny loaves, breads that they would have made, and then a dessert. And desserts are usually the highlight because you don't have the. They were usually very rich. They had, of course, lots of cream, butter, and so the cream of currant pudding was one. Sour cream pie is another.
Yeah, they had a lot of gout back then.
Yeah.
What I...
Apple tarts and things like that. But that's the base of what, and we give variety depending on what people want. If people are coming back for a second or third meal, we change the menu for them so they get a chance to sample a different.
All right, so if people are interested in history, they can go out to Schaghticoke, the Knickerbocker Mansion, and take a tour and see what's going on. And you sometimes have reenactors out there. And
Oh, yes, yeah,
things like
yeah.
that.
We have our most interesting event, I think, anyway, is Nick at Night. And Nick at Night, we have usually the weekend before Halloween.
Is that, I think, yeah, we're gonna talk about all these events. Nick at Night, well, yeah, why don't you talk about that one,
Yeah.
and then we'll go backwards.
Yeah.
And Nick at Night has, in each room of the mansion is a reenactor who portrays someone who either lived in the mansion, one of the Knickerbockers, or someone who is affiliated with the mansion, and they tell their story in first person. They're ghosts, but they're not spooky ghosts. You know, they're historical ghosts.
So they're not telling us.
For example, Herman Knickerbocker will tell about his 3 marriages, and we might have one of the slaves talk about what it was like to live in the basement of the mansion, because that's where the slaves lived. And
So they're not really telling a ghost story, though.
no,
Oh, okay.
no, but their stories are spooky enough
Yeah, well,
without
I would
bringing
just-
in the
You don't, yes, you
supernatural.
don't, yes, you don't need to have the supernatural to have some of these stories be interesting. The really interesting thing about our Nick at Night this past year, every one of the reenactors was a descendant of the
Okay.
Knickerbockers.
And then people can bring kids, you sort of can learn some history. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's going to be October 29th, 30th, and 31st in 2010. So I'm going to go back to the beginning here. This show will be on before the first events. I'm going to talk about many events that are going to be up at the mansion, the Knickerbocker Mansion, from April right through to October. So why don't we start with this April 23rd and 24th. I mean, some of these events are not at the mansion, but you can talk about them.
Right.
Why don't we start with this first one? Looks very interesting. You're going to have, it's like a one-person show, two great lions.
Two-person show, and it's not at the mansion. On Friday night is the first night of it, and it's at the Greenwich Central High School.
Okay.
And then Saturday night, same show, except we're doing a dinner with it, a Dutch dinner.
But is it two separate? It's two people reenacting Teddy Roosevelt and Booker T. Washington.
Right. We have two of our reenactors have put this together. One of them does an excellent Teddy Roosevelt.
Okay.
He interprets Teddy Roosevelt extremely well. And the other one is a man who has actually interpreted the slave, a Knickerbocker family slave at the mansion.
And
They've put together a program with Teddy Roosevelt inviting Booker T. Washington to the White House, and it was historically the first time a black man had been invited to the White House by a American president.
It's based on a real
It's based on a real event, and so they have put this program together, which is why we're sponsoring it.
Oh, okay.
But because we need money for our chimney system project, and I'll just jump off to that just for a second, we have a state grant, which we have to match $58,000, which will build the chimney system in the west side of the house. And no restoration can happen in the west side of the house until this chimney system is put in. And it will
Okay.
start with a fireplace in the cellar where the slaves did their cooking and go right straight up and out the roof. So we have to match that by May 15th of this year.
Okay.
We are several $1,000s shy of that total amount. So the events that we are having a number of events between now and May 15th, and this weekend that we're talking about there with Booker T. Washington.
Okay, well, I should say tickets are only $5. So I don't know. You
well,
break it.
like I had mentioned, fundraising from the cornfields of Schaghticoke is a real challenge, so we have to make things affordable.
Okay.
So hopefully people will come to that.
So April 23rd and 24th. On the 23rd, it's at the Greenwich High School. And on the 24th, it's going to be at the Masonic Temple in Schaghticoke. But all this is on the website. And it's sort of a what should I say? It's not really a play. It's more of
Well, they're in persona. They speak as.
Okay, they come out in the character.
president.
yeah, they're
Yes.
basically reenacting that important
Okay,
historical
so Teddy
moment.
Roosevelt and Booker T. Washington.
Right.
Now on the 25th, you have something at the Stillwater Community Service Center, which is also, and all these events are to raise money for the mansion.
Right.
This is called what? The Mermaid of Edam?
The Mermaid of Edam, yes.
Of
it's
Edam, a Dutch fairy tale. Why don't you tell us?
It's a Dutch fairy tale. It's produced by the Schenectady Theater for Children, and we thought it was really appropriate to use this as a fundraiser because the Knickerbockers were Dutch, and we're just coming out of the 400th anniversary of the Dutch coming to the Hudson Valley, and it's a one-act play, a musical. And
Okay.
it tells the story of a mermaid who washes up on the shore in the village of Edam, and the townspeople try to change her from a mermaid into a housewife,
Okay.
and the calamity that ensues
Well,
afterwards.
it sounds like a Washington Irving kind of
It
tale.
it kind of, yes, it would remind you of a Washington Irving tale, though it is an old Dutch fairy tale from the 1600s.
So this one's going to be in the Stillwater the Stillwater Area Community Services Center,
Right.
and this is another fundraiser for you guys. But I notice it says free to the public, but donations are appreciated. Okay, you're going to have to. What kind of fundraising is this? You
It
gotta-
was suggested. Well, like I said, you have to fundraise differently when you're
I
out in a
know, I'm
rural
just-
community. You know, it's interesting. What works in the city of Albany does not
can-
work
no,
out in the
I'm
country.
sure.
And actually, it was suggested to us that we would probably be more successful if we just asked for donations.
People might be, that's probably a good way to do
So
it.
that's why we go with the flow, so to speak.
Okay.
And we've been successful over the years doing that.
Okay.
You know, whichever works is what we do.
Okay.
Then the next event comes.
So you have Mother's Day, you have an open house.
That's a big one. That's when we officially open the mansion for the
Oh,
warm
okay.
weather months. And it basically kicks off our season. And we're open. We have a pancake breakfast in the morning. We do mansion tours, cemetery tours all day long.
And you're going to have reenactors.
We'll
and
have reenactors.
Cemetery, okay. So
And actually, we have probably the first Memorial Day service for veterans actually occurs at the mansion on that day
Okay.
when we remember the veterans in there. We have veterans that go all the way back to like the King George's War.
that's pre-Revolutionary War.
Queen Anne's War.
right.
Yeah, all these wars that people don't even really think about, but are actually important for the settling of this area.
So this is not only it's the special events, but it's sort of the kickoff of your season.
Right.
All right. Now we're going into this will be on many times in the spring and early summer. July 24th and 25th, you're having this will be at the mansion. 4 centuries of Dutch history. Now you got 4 different things. Maybe you could tell us quickly about some of these. I don't know, Steve. Do you know?
Sure. What it is we have a historical timeline set up on the property, and what we do is we have the people actually walk through Dutch history for the last 400 years, starting with Henry Hudson coming up the Hudson in 1609. And going through the colonial period, the British and then after the Dutch colonial period, the British colonization, and trace on up right through the Revolution, Civil War era, and right on up to current day.
Yeah.
I
We'll
keep-
have reenactors for
Yeah.
all of those various timelines.
I keep thinking, when I can't get out of my head you're out in Schaghticoke, and I keep thinking of the Hudson Valley in New York, and even up to Albany is a Dutch. I keep, it's way over. It's pretty.
Well, actually, Schaghticoke, where the mansion is located, while the address is Schaghticoke, it's about 1 mile from the Hudson River.
Oh,
So
okay.
we're actually closer to Mechanicville,
All right,
almost
okay.
than Schaghticoke. It's just off Route 67 between
Okay.
Mechanicville
So they
and
must have just
Schaghticoke.
came a little bit farther up the Hudson.
Yes. Well, the original Dutch person that we talked about, Herman Jansen Knickerbocker, he actually had the first farm in what is now the city of Mechanicville.
Oh, okay.
In 1680.
So I get-
So, the Dutch were up there, and it was an entire Dutch community in 1709 in Schaghticoke. It was the Dutch who settled there. So.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
I'm learning a lot of history today. So now in August 14th and 15th, you have it says here the Canal Splash. What's
Well,
that?
in the area, there is a canal splash, which is a promotion of all the various historical sites, but not all of them are necessarily historic. But it's all along the Erie Canal
okay.
and the Champlain Canal.
So it's various groups that weekend. Okay.
They're encouraged to open
I see, okay.
and be available to the public. And
Okay.
so it's the big name for the entire thing in the area is the Canal Splash. We're actually doing an antique show
Okay, I saw this on your antique
there,
thing, okay.
along with mansion tours, and we'll have refreshments.
So, but there'll be events all along, like Waterford or in our
Yeah.
area. Okay. Now, September 25th and 26th here, the Knickerbocker Harvest Festival. Again, what is this?
Good old-fashioned harvest festival.
Oh, yeah.
We have fresh produce, baked goods. We have a rummage sale.
I'm sure it's very nice up there in the fall too.
Yeah, beautiful.
And you have a flea market and some bakes. Okay, so you have
Yeah,
a,
we also coordinate with the Hudson River Ramble. The Hudson River Ramble is events that go all the way from Staten Island
Okay.
all
Yeah, I
the
think
way
I've
up
heard
the
of that.
Hudson River I think they go as far north now as Glens Falls.
Oh, okay.
And our contribution to the Ramble event is a hike to Devil's Chimney, which is a Native American shrine. It's about a 4-mile round trip, walk through cornfields and along the Hoosick River to this shrine that goes way back to the time of the Indians.
So see now I have a better sense of you're only a mile from the river up
Well,
there.
Schaghticoke means where the waters mingle,
Okay.
because it's at the junction of the Hudson, the Hoosick, and the Tomhannock.
Yeah, I guess I'm from Troy, and my conception is always going, you think you're going away from the river when I go out that way. All right. Well, then we already talked about Nick at Night, which is around Halloween. So that's a lot of events. All these events are on the website under, I guess if you click on 2010 events. Some of them cost money. Some are free, but they accept donations. And these are all fundraisers.
Always.
So that's the Knickerbocker Mansion. So I thank you for coming, Steve. And
Thank you for having us.
Stana, very good. And this show will be on all spring and early summer, and hopefully we'll get some people to come out to the Knickerbocker Mansion in Schaghticoke. So thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Well, that's it for getting to know you, and we'll see you next time.